Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure and honor to be here with you today. So this is a very strange talk to give, since I like to talk about projects in very early stages to get feedback, but this is something that hasn't really happened yet. So this is a new record for me on how early you can start to talk about the project. But I think it's still, of course, Hillel asked me to come, and I was very happy to come and see how kind of experiment with talking about the project at this stage. But I think it does make sense in the sense that what we're doing in Finland is something that could and I think should be replicated in many other countries, and it's very useful to have a room full of people who hopefully will have opportunities to have similar discussions with policymakers, as I did a few years ago in Finland, and try to propose something similar to be done in France or other countries. So the title for today is RCTs as public procurement, and that's the public procurement part is really what I would like to stress. So this is really what I'm going to tell you about is really just a new way for the government to buy services from the private sector, services here being integration policies for newly arrived refugees. And RCTs is there just as a way to define how much this private service provider is going to be paid. So I'm going to be much more specific about what's going on in here, but this is really a public procurement procedure that works as an RCT, as an aside product of that we get a very nice research design also. But that's really a side product. Right, so let me give you just kind of 3 pieces of background information on how we started this program. So, as we learned today, and maybe you noticed in 2015, there were a few more asylum seekers coming to Europe than usually. So this is what it looked like for Finland. So we had an 890% increase in the number of asylum seekers in between 2015 and 2014. Now, it's 30,000 individuals. It's not like that. In the grand scheme of things, that's not such a huge thing, you would think, but of course this was all that policymakers were and the media was talking about during the fall of 2015. One reason that people were so worried was that if you look at the immigrants and former refugees coming from these same areas, how they've done in the Finnish labor market, the answer is that they are they are the most disadvantaged group in the Finnish labor market. So these bars here give you the percent. They answer the question. If you take an Iraqi man who has lived in Finland for 1 year and compare the average earnings of Iraqi man who's recently arrived to average earnings of Finnish man, native men, of the same year who are of the same age, you find that the Iraqi men make up 4%, have annual earnings of 4% of that of comparable natives, comparable in age and year of observation. Mostly driven by most Iraqi men not having any income or any earnings during their first years. And now if you go to do the same thing after 15 years since arrival, you're still at something like a 20%. So there seems to be very large and very persistent problems for people coming from the source countries that were mostly represented in 2015 to assimilate or to integrate into the Finnish labor market. So, there was a bit of a panic going on in the government, mostly from the practical point of view of, having this shock of people entering the system means that, it's just going to be really hard to, find slots in the integration programs for all these people. The budget had already been made and for the next year, and this was a practical problem. The third thing that I think contributed to the willingness of the government to try new things is that we had a new government. So this is a picture of Prime Minister Juha Sipilä, who started his government in May 2015, and just a few months before the refugee crisis started. As you see from the picture, he's very keen on flowcharts. He's an engineer who had a long and successful career in business before becoming prime minister, and who has a very kind of engineering-oriented way of solving things, which is of course not the most common characteristic of a politician. So this is kind of a combination of a few things that really opened the opportunity to try something that hadn't been tried before. So what came out of that is this social investment bond for integration. So this is a press release from last summer, put out by Ministry of Economic Affairs and Employment. Incidentally, there's our former prime minister, who's now vice president of the European Commission, celebrating this new initiative. So the initiative, as they tell it in here, is to find jobs for 2,500 immigrants. And I'll explain in a second how refugees extended to include other immigrants as well. And the idea is that let me see. So this is what they want. How the policymakers express is that what is new in the SIB, the Social Impact Bond, the program I'm talking about, is that the activity is financed by investors who also bear the financial risk, and the public sector pays for the proven outcomes only. That is when an immigrant finds a job. So that was the idea of let's use private funding. Now this is a press release telling that European Investment Fund invests 10 million euros, so you have to be quite flexible in your definition of what private money is. But in any case, that to me the source of funding is not that important. What's important is this idea of paying for performance. So let me show another. This is also nice presentation, since I don't have much my own material, so I can just show stuff from think tanks and things like that. So this is a kind of a slide that many kind of enthusiastic think tank people were showing around Helsinki before this thing happened, kind of talking about impact investing. Well, seems to be a very kind of hot word inside certain policy circles at the moment, with the idea of let's use private money and let's pay for performance. So the way it's supposed to work is that there's a problem that needs to be solved. So the government defines the problem, then there's an investor, they make up a fund. The fund kind of says that, okay, we will take care of this. Something that government would usually do. Let's outsource that to us, and we'll find a service provider, and then there's some great social outcome that comes out. Then there's an independent evaluator. If everything looks good, then the government pays to this social investment fund. Right now, you can do this in many ways, as you would, any economist instantly recognizes that, this part is going to be very crucial. How do we define what performance is? So by stroke of luck, I had been working a lot on the integration of immigrants before, so somebody came up with an idea of asking me to come to the meeting where the government was, or the Ministry of Labor was discussing about how to implement this. Now that was as you would expect, there were many ideas on how to evaluate impact. There were talks about mathematical models with very little willingness to discuss what exactly those mathematical models were entailed. But more, I think for me, more as a provocation than as something that I would think would be implemented, I was saying that this is actually really easy. You have 2,500 jobs. You have 30,000 people coming as asylum seekers, even if only 1/3 of them will get get a permit to stay, you still have plenty of people. You have much more people who would be suitable for this sort of thing than you have slots. So we can randomize. That's the fairest way to allocate these slots anyways. And we get actual impact, as well measured as you ever can measure it. So then you're going to have a fair competition, basically, between this new initiative and the business as usual model. And then we can do things like we can evaluate reliably what's the impact on, say, what's the fiscal impact of the new initiative. And then we can split that. And that's actually what ends up happening. So that's, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but that's the kind of that's the deal that came out from this. So there's this new type of treatment that this private initiative comes up with. So what they basically said is that we've talked with many business leaders in Finland. We know how to talk with them. We know what they need, and we have like 2,500 real jobs already arranged. These employers are keen to take refugees. They're mainly jobs that where you find it hard to get natives to do, to come to work, and refugees should be very good kind of stepping stone jobs to start the integration process. So instead of doing what you usually do and put these guys, the refugees, to a classroom training of Finnish language and society for 1 year, we'll give them like 60 days of intensive training on language training, already kind of with a job on the view that if you're gonna become a cleaner, then we're gonna teach you the sort of the Finnish that you need in order to be able to do that job, and then we'll get this job for the person, and we will provide some on-the-job language training as we go. Now, so the key innovations here is not so much this kind of a treatment. I mean, it's not even clear whether that is a good treatment or not. It's plausible that actually learning Finnish well before you enter the labor market might be better than getting some really low-skill job first and then perhaps never learning Finnish properly. We really don't know. So what we as scientists, what we want to do then is to try out. It's not obvious what is good or whether you would want to go to this program or not as a refugee. So we can run an RCT and learn what the effects are. So that's not a key innovation in terms of being an economist, but certainly a key innovation for a government. But I think equally importantly, what we now get is good incentives for the service providers. So that the deal is that for the first 3 years after entering the program, there's going to be a comparison of these randomly selected people, refugees, to a control group that is actually comparable because it's due from randomization, and there's going to be a horse race. So we can compare how much unemployment benefits do each of the group get on average, how much income taxes do they pay for the 3 years, and and then that if there is a surplus just from the government budget point of view, that surplus will be split by half. So the private initiative get half, and the government keeps the rest. And of course, as a society, we'll also get all the other benefits that come from potentially faster integration. Now, what that does is it also aligns the incentives of the service providers. Since the business as usual model is that the government buys this language training from private companies and based by student days. No. So if you're one of these language training providers, the worst thing that can happen to you is that your students find a job. Then you lose your customers. So that's the incentive that we start from, and we move to an incentive that every euro that your customers save on unemployment benefits, every euro they pay on taxes, you get half of that. So I think that's a very nice way to align the interest of the government and the providers. Right, so it's been now going on since October 2016. We started with newly arrived refugees, or people who had just gotten a permit to stay in Finland. So they had been in Finland for roughly a year already, but with very limited integration training, basically no job experience in Finland. But once they get the permit, they become customers of the employment services. And as the first step of becoming a customer, there's this information session that the employment office arranges. Basically telling people what it means to be an unemployed person in Finland. So 2/3 of those sessions were randomized into treatment, which meant that there would be somebody from this private initiative telling that, hey, if you want to have a job, I have a job for you. So you just now, once we're done, you sign up with your employment officer, and we'll take care of you. And then 1/3 of the information sessions, there would be no mentions about this new program, and they would not be eligible to participate. So it was on randomization of offers, and then people could decline, and quite few of the refugees did decline. So by the early 2017, it started to be clear that there was a problem we didn't anticipate in 2015. We didn't have enough refugees to really fill all the slots. So then from fall of 2017 onwards, there's been a radical extension of the target group. So now also non-refugee immigrants and immigrants who have lived longer in Finland but remain unemployed are eligible. And then there's a good pre-screening for suitability, and then individual level randomization of who gets to participate and who's left out. So all in all, we have now, I think there's about 2,500 people have participated in one form of a randomization. This will go on for a year and a half, and then there will be payments to this investment fund, and then at some point I start to do the actual research on what happens long term to these guys. Since the last point I want to make here is that it's wonderful to be able to do this sort of things. It's nice to have a government that's willing to try out new things. It's particularly nice to do that in Finland, where we have all these wonderful register data that we can just keep on following these people as long as they live in Finland. So in 5 years, I hope to have some initial results on how these guys did in the labor market, and then you can invite me back every 5 years, and we'll get an update of what happened longer term, what happened to their kids, who they married, are they healthier, are they less likely to emigrate, you name it. But I guess I'll stop here and continue in 5 years. Okay.
Okay, how many questions do we have? Who wants to ask question? 1, 2? Just 2? Okay, Luc.
So if I understood it right, you mentioned that at some point you had a low take-up of your program because migrants and asylum seekers refugees had to accept to enter this program.
Yeah.
So you solved it more or less, but in the end, it will remain some uncertainty in the estimates you get. So if there's any positive estimate, it's good, even though it might not be statistically significant for the investor. Isn't that correct? So somehow there is some asymmetry in the payment, right? If the outcome, the point estimate might be negative, it might be a fiscal loss. So in that case, they're not sanctioned, right?
Okay, so there is no sanctions in the case. So there's the risk is one-sided for the investor. Now,
and so doesn't it change a little bit the picture, because in a way the logic of this scheme is to have the private sector bear the risk. But due to the statistical uncertainty you have, in the end, you might say that they're not bearing that much risk, and if by luck there is a positive point estimate they would get. So they should in fact strive for very low power through experiment. And on average, they would expect good gains. So there is a game between you and them on that.
Yeah.
The incentives are not aligned on that side.
Yeah. Right. So there's certainly, if you design the contract in a way that it was designed, that there's no downside risk for the investors, then they might be willing to take the lottery of having low power and some chance of getting fantastically large results. This is going to be paid by point estimate, and that's certainly, I think, a very interesting part of this project for me as a researcher is to see how this private company responds to incentives. I think there are more things than I have time to discuss today. But for that, the trade-off is between volumes and increasing the chance of a lot kind of getting high average by chance. Now, the people who have been most concerned of not filling the slots has been this private initiative, since they have had all the negotiations with the employers who are starting to get frustrated that you promised us 2,000 employees and we only have 200. So where are they? So they were insisting to expand the pool in order to have sufficient volumes to make it profitable.
But that's not what you want. You want higher take-up and a smaller population to enter the experiment.
Well, it's not clear whether you want high take-up, since it's not clear whether this is a good treatment, or this is a good treatment for some people, but it's to my understanding the limited amount of kind of qualitative information we have. Thus far is that many of the refugees think that it makes sense to invest properly in human capital formation in the beginning, rather than just rush into a low-paid job.
We'll invite you for a seminar.
Good.
No, just clarification on on the employer side. So how does it work? They committed to this to 2,500, and then they're waiting and they.
Well, it's that's part of the things that have been outsourced to this.
Yeah,
I don't know actually. Okay. So what I see as the kind of a consultant on how to design this thing is that there's these people kind of who really believe that, or who come with very big talks of we can help. We have all these employers waiting. We know how to do this. I have no idea what this is. They're very business type people with all sort of big talk, which might not be entirely substantiated, but that's really something that we're gonna learn now that we have a
because just understand your treatment. If it's if this job offer is secure, 100%, or the employer still has a say on the employee and
so if you really
and the related question is about the type of occupation. So the randomization is not stratified across by skills or
right. So let me show. This is kind of advertisement material from the private initiative. So we may find you a job in part. They're kind of is what they are communicating to people who might potentially want to participate in here. But I think part of the idea is really to kind of let them run their model and to see whether they can deliver as they promise. And I, in particular, I'm not providing kind of supervision on what's happening. My job is just to come up with a design on how do we figure out whether this was a good deal. a good way to integrate people or not. So we'll learn, but eventually. But at this point, I don't really have a good answer.
Okay, thank you. So unless there is a last pressing question, very short.
Yeah, in a sense, the underlying assumption here is that the skills of the refugees or any qualification that they acquired in their country of origin cannot be used, right?
Yeah.
So there is no in the interview. There is no way that they try to collect information about this.
They do try, and they do try to. I mean, there is all a tiny but still existing fraction going to one of the top business school in Finland, getting some training in how to do business in Finland. It's just that they have a limited number of kind of employers that they have talked with. Most of the jobs are from very low-paid, low-skilled opportunities. But I think the correct way to see this is to add a new module to the palette of integration process. It's not going to work for everybody, but things that we learn here is, first, we do learn the take-up rate, so we learn whether how refugees themselves perceive this opportunity, and then eventually we will see whether there's certainly going to be a short-term gain in employment rates because the treatment is basically giving you a real job. But as we move forward, we will see whether those who chose those who were randomized to the control group, whether they catch up and maybe take over. I think that's an entirely open question that we will learn.
Okay, so I think we can stop here and thank our three speakers for this diverse set of presentations. Thank you.